So I've been working on the Horizon operator for our new model of deploying OpenStack, and in this video I just want to show how that implementation looks and how we can create an instance of Horizon, create multiple replicas of Horizon, log into the web console, and ultimately use it like you would in any normal deployment of OpenStack. So we'll switch over to the terminal. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start this operator running. So this will be integrated with the OpenStack operator and will just be deployed as part of the normal OpenStack deployment. But in this environment where I'm developing it, we can just run it on my laptop here. So then over here, if we do oc get pol service equals horizon, so we don't have an instance yet, and that's because we don't have anything deployed in the cluster. So the operator is running and it's waiting for us to now go and create an instance of Horizon. So if we take a look at the samples config here, so this is just a small, easily consumable sample. There's a lot of things that we have as part of this spec that can be tuned. So if we take a look at things that are available to be tuned, so we can change the container image, the number of replicas, the node selector. If we want to assign Horizon to only run on certain nodes, we can do that. Enabling debug, preserving jobs. So if we launch any job to clean something up or configure something, then you can preserve that job so you can look at the logs of it and do some debugging if needed. Custom service config. If we need to override anything about how Horizon works, we can do that via the custom service config parameter in the spec. Routes, so at the moment I don't have anything implemented for the route configuration, but the objective is to allow like a custom route name, custom SSL certificates. Maybe you want to use Cert Manager and have your CA sign your certificates that are used, so that's the intention of that. And shared memcache, so if you already have a memcache deployed in the environment and you just want to use that with Horizon, we can point to that certainly. If we don't specify that, then we will go ahead and create our own, and we'll do it based on the number of replicas of Horizon you have. So if you have 3 replicas of Horizon, we'll create 3 replicas of memcached. So if we go back and have a look, so this is just a very basic config here. So we'll just change this to 3, so we get 3 replicas, and we'll take a look at what that looks like. So we do oc apply-f on that file. And if we watch down here now, we should see our operator start to respond to that. So here we go, we can see it here now. It's going through, it's creating the Horizon public routes, it's creating the services, the config map with all the details. So if we go have a look over here now, we do the oc get po-l service equals Horizon, we can see we've now got Horizon containers being created there. And if we take a look here, we can see we also have an instance now of Horizon, and that just matches what we've got in our file that we just deployed. So we can see that we're starting to update the conditions in the status. So we go through and we update those. We put the public endpoint for Horizon into the status as well, so you can take a look at that. And we create an input hash of all the config items, and we put that in this input hash. So if you go and change anything to do with the configuration, it'll see that as a change and it will reconcile the deployment. So it will create new deployment, roll out new replicas so that the config change is picked up. So if we just follow the logs for one of those pods, we can see it's still starting up and doing everything that's needed for Horizon to initialize. So once that's running Apache, we should be able to then log into the web UI. So we can see we have 3 running pods there now. So let's have a look at what else we have here. If we look for, so we can see that we also have 3 replicas of memcache that are running. So these pods will reference each of the memcache, so that it's a shared pool. It's not just like one references one. They all reference every memcached instance, so that we have some high availability there within that memcache deployment as well for Horizon. So from there, if we do oc get horizon -o YAML, and we look at the status field, we have the URL for the public endpoint. So if we just copy that into our web browser, you can see we have Horizon here. And then if we log in, we can see we have Horizon like we would normally expect to see. So back to our terminal. So what we end up with is a config map for Horizon. So we can see we have the config map for Horizon there, and we also have one for memcached, for all the memcached configuration. So if we take this one, for example, do oc get config map -o YAML, take a look at this one. We can see we end up with, your standard Apache config file, and then we have the local settings.conf file, which is the one that, it's a Django file with all the Django variables that are used for Horizon to run. And these get mapped into the container and assigned via collar. So this is the collar config file, and you can see there we do a bunch of work in this merged directory, the file libconfig data merged, and then we move it over into the relevant directories that it needs to be in for this to run. So over into the Apache directory, for example, we've got a Horizon secret, so we're just generating this randomly at the moment, and that's so that when you log into one of these instances, you've got cookies that can be shared between all of them when you've got 3 replicas. So it doesn't matter what you scale to there in terms of replicas. You can scale to 15 and have a lot of replicas of Horizon. They'll all have that shared secret, which allows them to share, the cookies to be used with any instance of that. And then just any of your custom config stuff goes, so anything provided via that custom config setting option, which in our case was session timeout 3600, that goes into this custom settings.py file that is under OpenStack dashboard. So if we take a look at one of these pods again, if we needed to debug any of them, we can do something like OC debug on that pod name. That'll launch a debug pod, and from there we can run collar start, and this will show us what happens when this pod's actually started. So if you run into any issues with your config, you can use the debug pod, run collar start, and this will reproduce any errors that you get, and you can debug within the container and find out what has actually gone wrong. So I'll wait for this to finish in my case, and I'll just walk through some of the debugging things that we might be able to do from the debug container. Okay, so that's finished there now. So if we just Control-C that, we go into the OpenStack dashboard. So we can see here we have the local settings file, for example. This is the one I was talking about. Now we're templating things into this. So if you look at Horizon secret, so there's where we're setting that secret key file, for example. So in that we have the secret. We look in here. So we can see we've just generated a random string there for our secret. So for memcached, if we check the config map and see how that is implemented, we can see there that we add each of the memcached instances to the location there. So we go back to our debug pod, which I removed. Just launched a new one. So we do OC debug on just any of these to give us a debug pod. Then we can run collar start. So just go ahead and copy in that config. So I think at this point it should already be copied there. So we go into etc OpenStack dashboard, and then VI our local settings. We look for caches. So we can see there, you can see how that location gets set. So each instance of Horizon will reference the entire cluster of memcache servers, so that we're sharing that data around if one of them was to go down. We can set affinity and place them on different nodes as well, so that if you lose a single node, you can keep Horizon up and running. The thing to note is that they're currently not managed separate in terms of replicas. So if you create 15 replicas of Horizon, you'll get 15 replicas of memcached under this implementation. The alternative is to then use the shared memcached deployment. So in traditional OOO deployments, we've always had a single cluster of memcached nodes on the controllers. This just gives a bit more granularity. If you wanted to have only one replica of Horizon and just a single memcached for it to use, you can definitely do that if you don't want to have the shared memcached. So then for the secret implementation, we just moved from the default, which allows Horizon to generate it, which would end up with each pod generating their own secret, and then you wouldn't be able to work within the multiple replicas. We just changed that to use read from file, and we template out that secret file there. And the other thing we template into here is just the keystone endpoint. So this one here, we can see that one there's been templated. We take a look back here at the code. That's just all done with Ginger2. So we Ginger2 template in that memcached address, which ends up being the list of all the nodes, and the keystone URL we can see is templated in there as well. So that's basically all there is to it. As I said, if you want to override the config items, that's just in your, when you're defining the instance of Horizon. In here, you can just put in whatever custom config you might like, and we'll make sure that is applied within the configuration of Horizon when it starts up. So pretty simple, that's all there is to it. As I said, in the future I want to work on the routes. It's currently not implemented. We just generate the one route based on your domain within the cluster. You can obviously go ahead and create custom routes manually, but I want to implement a way for you to do that via the spec file so that you don't have to then deploy it and then go and create a route manually after the fact. Some other things we'd like to work on is some way to customize that Horizon secret, just in case you don't want the randomly generated string that we're currently using to run there. So just to summarize, in your config file, if you define 3 replicas, then we will create 3 replicas of memcached, as we can see there. So if I were to go and edit that now and change it to 1 replica, we can see that's scaled down the memcached deployment, and it's also scaling down the Horizon deployment. So they work in turn unless you specify that shared memcached and point it to a shared memcached instance that runs within the cluster. Then that's how that works at the moment. And I will, once we integrate with the OpenStack operator, I'll show you how that works with the shared memcached deployment as well. So that's all I've got today. Really quick video and an overview of how we're using Horizon, deploying it within the OpenShift environment. We can look more at the technical side of things, but this is more of a usability perspective and how we can use it, configure it, and ultimately leverage Horizon in our OpenStack deployments on top of OpenShift.